Enjoyed visiting about listening to each other about Thanksgiving. So today we are going to lecture on listening and then of course critical thinking, which is something that we've started to do already when we were talking about persuasion and fallacies. So first, well, let's just ask the question, how many of you think you're a good listener? Only 3 people.
Think?
4 or 5? Okay. And then for those of you that didn't, why don't you think you're a good listener?
I get told I'm not a good listener all the time.
Oh, feedback.
Depending on what it is, do I really care for it?
Okay.
I zone out.
Yeah, I get distracted really easily.
I thought you raised your hand.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of a good listener.
So sometimes you're a good listener.
I think I'm a good listener, but there's some people I don't.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's weigh this out with some statistics. And so I'm going to borrow some statistics other than your textbook and go to the Seiler and Bale Communication Works textbook. Let's say that you are a careful listener and you're taking notes in a lecture, let's say like this. After 2 days, how much do you think you're going to remember? Best case scenario. Okay, 40%, 1/3. Any other guesses?
Give them 1/4. Maybe 10. 25%.
10%.
And more accurate.
Okay, after 1 day, it's 25%. And that is if you're a pretty good listener. Now that doesn't mean that we're all that bad, because we know that we're supposed to be here Tuesdays or Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11 o'clock. You know, so we get enough of the message. However, overall, we're kind of bad listeners. Of course, there's things that you can do to improve that, but that's what this lecture is about. So all these stories you told each other in a couple of days, a lot of that will be lost. So what is listening?
The process of receiving, instructing, learning from, and responding to spoken or nonverbal messages.
All right, so we know it's a process, which means that it is constantly changing. It's a series of steps, so we know that from our previous lectures. And what I like about this definition is it's talking about more than just the spoken word. It's talking about the nonverbal communication, part of the communication process. So there's more to listening than just receiving something audible. Moving forward, and your book actually has this model, but they don't call it the Hurrier model. That's what it is. And it's important for you to know that this is the actual model, if you take another communication class, that you have studied it, that it is in our listening chapter. And here are the steps to listening. So just like the communication process, the listening process has similar steps. So the first one is actually receiving the information, which they're calling hearing, but this can also be the nonverbal communication that comes in. So we could be watching something, hearing something, and just by itself, that doesn't mean that a person is listening. It just means that you could be open to receiving information. And you know this, because how many of you have been present in something, you hear things, or you're watching things, but you're really not registering it. Happens all the time. So we have to move down to a couple of things, and the thing about this process is you keep on going back and forth on each of these steps, and you can see this. So the next thing is understanding, which when we talked about the communication process, we talked about encoding and decoding messages because everything's symbolic. So you have to take that information, and as you move through here, you start remembering things. And we're not talking about remembering necessarily what the encoding process means. That's part of it. We're also drawing upon our experiences and our perceptions. And we'll talk about perceptions more in this class in a later lecture. But our experiences are what we're doing in this process as we move down this cycle. And then we start interpreting. This is where things get kind of crazy. Interpreting is the attribution cycle. It's a process that we go through, and we start to make sense of the world around us. So let's say that I am receiving information. I see Sally every day at work, and she's always smiling, and she's always chipper, and she says nice things. Okay, so as I think about that, I have an understanding that, I've seen this situation before, I'm remembering things, I'm remembering people that have been happy like this before, and now I try and make sense of why Sally is like this. So in my mind, I may say, well, people that I've known like Sally in the past usually have a pretty good life. They're just happy people because things are going their way. And I move very quickly down this cycle, and I go into judgment. That's the evaluating part. And I can say, that's a good thing for Sally. Or maybe I'm jealous of Sally for having such a good and easy life. And I may respond in kind, and I may be nice to her, or whatever. Whatever happens here, we can go in different ways. I can actually come back over here and interpret this differently, attribute the way she's communicating, and say, I've taken some psychology classes, and you really can't be all that happy all the time, so I don't believe it. I think Sally's a very, very depressed person. I think something's wrong with her. Which goes right into judging. We ever do that? And I may respond differently. And not responding is still a response. There's a lot of errors that can happen in this, as you can see, just with that simple example. And that is actually the listening process. And you can see how complex it can be. Does that make sense? All right, now that we've talked about the communication process, let's talk about the different types of listening that we are a part of. Now, what I like about your book is it shows how interwoven different listening styles are, and that's important. But it's going to be a little bit easier to borrow this from a different textbook, separate these out a little bit, and then we can interweave them together. So for this portion, I'm borrowing this from the Lucas Public Speaking textbook, and starting with appreciative listening, which actually at the end of your textbook it talks about appreciative listening, or things that you like to listen to. That's one type of listening. So what types of appreciative listening do we partake in?
We're talking about the football game.
Okay.
Or soccer.
Okay, all right, talking about the game. We like to, and I know this class enjoys sports a lot, so this is something that you like to listen to, or listening to a game. What other things do we like to listen to? Music. A show, a comedy. These are all things, going to a movie, these are all things that we do because we like to. Okay, and that's one type of listening. Of course, you can come down here and see that comprehensive listening is a part of this as well. By the way, this doesn't have to be words either. You could be listening to a bird or oceans, and that's a type of appreciative listening. So comprehensive listening, you're talking about the game, you're talking about sports, you are watching a movie, maybe it's a mystery, and you're trying to understand. You could be listening to the news and trying to understand. So you can actually start coupling these two together. Or you can not like what you're listening to, but still try and understand it. So now we can start separating these out. This lecture is comprehensive listening. And actually, if I go back and we're looking at who's really benefiting in the listening process, students are benefiting a lot more, because you're spending more than 55% of your time. Your textbook says we spend 55% of our time listening. You spend more than that because you're a student, which means that you're learning and growing more than other people like myself that spends more time talking. So somewhere along the lines, you want to balance that off. What other things do we listen to understand? Lectures. How about your jobs? How many of you have jobs where you are listening to understand? Okay, what do you do?
Retail?
Okay, so you need to understand what the customer is saying and then make evaluations, which is going right into critical thinking. What is best for this type of situation? Is it supplements or something like that?
Supplements and shoes.
Okay, supplements and shoes. So you need to find out what their lifestyle is like. So you have to listen to your customers in order to understand them so that you can help serve them better. And if you can do that, then you'll be successful. You may not realize that, but you're partaking in empathic listening, which I'll explain in a moment. You said you?
Also retail.
Retail, what do you sell?
Foods.
Foods. Okay, all right. So again, you have to listen carefully to understand. Let's say you're a server. You need to know what they need so that you can make the right decisions and create a happier experience for them. The last one, which I've skipped over, is empathic listening. And it's not being psychic.
It's like having an understanding of the wallet.
Very close. It is attempting to understand the other person, and it's a two-way process. It's a perception. So empathic listening, if we go to the late Stephen Covey, and he spent, I think it was his third principle, he spent a lot of time talking about empathic listening. This is when the other person perceives that you understand them. And until that is reached, then you are not an empathic listener. So actually this last one is tricky because the person has to feel understood. And it's impossible to ever truly understand another person. I cannot know your experiences. I haven't walked in your shoes, okay, or yours. It is impossible to do that. But if we can reach a level where you feel like I understand you, then empathic listening is a success. So it doesn't matter if I do all the right things, if I say the right words, if I make the right, expressions. If you don't feel it from me, it's not there. And we try to do this, but sometimes we make some mistakes. So one of the first things we do, this is still from Stephen Covey, is if we're listening to an experience from someone, we try and understand what they're going through. So let's say that, I've noticed, I'm paying attention to you, and I've noticed that you look a little down. And so I ask you, and you tell me it's because you did bad on a test. Okay, so why are you so damned up? What's going on?
I couldn't get it before.
Okay, all right, our response was not very empathic. So let's say that I'm over there and I'm trying to understand why she's having a hard time, and so I think about it, and I'm like, I can think of a time where I took a test and I thought I was just going to ace this thing, and I didn't. In fact, I failed it. I failed it flat out. So instead what I do is I'm conjuring up these feelings of disappointment. This is how you must feel. And then I say, you know what? Don't feel bad because I took a test last week. I totally bombed it. Is that empathic? You're saying no. Why? What did I just do?
It was more like about comparing yourself as opposed to understanding them, not rationalizing it.
One up there.
I did, I went up to you. Okay, and then I made it about me. Okay, it's not about me. It's about me trying to understand you. You're not going to feel empathy from me because I just broke some of the rules in creating empathic listening. What would be better for me to do in order to create this? Can I still try and conjure up my own emotions?
Yeah, in a way.
Okay.
You can say, I understand, I feel what you feel about it. I can see where you're coming from.
Okay.
It makes me feel about the same way as you do.
Okay, I've had a similar experience, I'm trying to understand, don't know exactly. I could ask questions, but I'm not making it about me. And if she feels that you're reaching an understanding, you don't have to actually know what they're going through to have empathic listening. You know, that's one example. When you go to the doctor and they have the nurse over there talking to you, and you're feeling crummy, you don't need them to feel what you're feeling. You need them to understand. How many of you have gone to the doctor's office and you felt terrible and you went in and they were able to treat you? Going with some migraine or something like that. Okay, so they were able to actually reach this. They're like, you know, thank goodness somebody understands. And they can use their critical thinking, comprehensive, empathic, and critical thinking so that they can treat you. And then, of course, the other thing can happen where you go in and you're like, man, they don't know anything. Okay, that's because they're not, even if they can't treat you successfully, this can still be a part of that process. So you can see that empathic listening is that woven into that relational. So is the understanding. The analytical tends to be more of the critical, and of course the comprehensive. So you can see how these are all interwoven together depending on the situation. It's just a little bit easier to explain these singularly. All right, now that we know the different types of listening styles, this one's fun. This one I'm going to borrow out of the Communication Works textbook. We have different listening styles where we are drawn to people with different types of communication styles. So the first one here is people-oriented listeners or communicators. These are our people persons. How many of you feel like you're a people person? Okay, one thumbs down, and three enthusiastic hands up.
Yes, I am.
Okay, you're our storytellers. Is that right? Does that feel right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and from the three of you that raised your hands, I could see that. I could see that within you. You could probably tell a joke really well. We might have a joke telling day one of these days. They're fun to be around, okay? And we like stories. As humans, we are drawn to stories, to storytellers. So you can sit around a bonfire and those people are one after the other, and they can tell a joke and they can adapt to whoever's in front of them. They're highly audience-centered. They know what to do and how to adjust. So they can basically get along with everybody. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We love them, and we need them in our lives. They're relationship builders. Let's move down to the next one. Action-oriented. Action-oriented are not storytellers. They are the polar opposite. In fact, if you could just get down to the bottom line as quick as possible, a text message, a bullet point, as few words, succinct, we're going to get along. There you go, Paul. Greg? I can see that. Okay, as few words as possible. You don't need to tell me about your dog's best friend, sister's babysitter, something or other. Just what time do we have to leave? I don't care what happened to my bank account, how much money is in there. very, very quick communication. How many of you know somebody like that? Everybody knows somebody like this. Do you see where these two might have some issues? All right, let's add some more complexity to this. Content-oriented listeners and communicators. This is what we call input, if you are familiar with Strengths Finders, Gallup Strengths Finders. A couple of you are familiar. This is a person who pays attention to detail. An example of this would be, how many of you have a favorite hobby in here? Okay, about 4 or 5 of you have a favorite hobby. You decide, you know what, I want to learn everything I can about this hobby, and you do. I'm going to go fishing. I want to learn how to fish. So you go out, you read the books, you study, you go, and let's say you take some lessons, spend time at Cabela's. Now you know a lot about fishing. You've spent some time with this, and then Amber comes up to me. It says, so, I heard you're into fishing. Oh my gosh, let me tell you about it. And that's all I talk about. Okay, whether she likes it or not. So I'm gonna go, and I may not pick up on the signals, you know, that she's really not interested in this. But now I'm in this zone, and all I want to do is talk about fishing. Oh, does this sound like you? So this is what content orienters do. Highly accurate. Okay, it is not likely that they're going to research something and be wrong, because they're gonna really look into it deeply. And then the last one, time-oriented. They can pretty much tolerate anything. I'll listen to your stories, I'll listen to your hobby. I don't care if you want things in a short, succinct fashion, I can deal with that. But for me, I have a limit, whatever the limit is. It might be 10 minutes, it might be 20 minutes. And when I'm done, I'm done.
See, I'm more.
Different scenarios can bring this out in us. If you're in a hurry, there's some people that'll jump right into this. Be action-oriented very quickly. But time-oriented, you're the ones that have the first suggestions as far as when we should stop for our presentations. You're my time-oriented ones. I'll listen to you up to a point. Do you identify yourselves with one or more of these? All of them, depending on the time? Okay.
Yeah.
Two.
I'm getting yelled at by a family member. I'm very action oriented, so I'm like, just get it over with. I'm tired of this.
Tell me how much you...
But about 98% of the time, I'm pretty people oriented.
Okay.
Good luck on Thursday.
So who's going to... So who's going to have struggles getting along with each other?
Action with everybody.
And the content, people kind of like, sometimes like, know too much.
Okay, so content, who's going to get on content-oriented nerves?
The time person
Time
and the action
And
person.
action.
Mhm.
I think the people person would be okay with it.
Okay, all right. Now, who is going to have a problem with the people-oriented?
Nobody.
Action oriented.
Maybe action oriented because of
And
time.
time.
Okay.
And then the
But I feel
time.
like people-oriented people kind of like adapt to
Oh,
it.
yeah.
They're, like, if you know that you're talking to someone that doesn't really like to talk that much, then you just keep it short and simple because you're people-oriented.
Mhm.
You
No.
already know that about that person, so that's the way you're going to act.
Or you change when you're over the plate because you see it coming and the person doesn't want it. You're like, oh, that's time.
Yeah.
Because you can tell by the person's personality, hey, I might want to cut this short.
Yeah, I feel, yeah.
Okay, that's because you have some skills, some communication skills, and are able to recognize this. And that's actually my next question, is what do you do in order to adapt to other types of listening and communication styles? And you're already at that level. You're already at that place where you're adapting, because everybody has something of value to offer, even if it's not in the same delivery that you appreciate, that you're most drawn to. The content-oriented individuals will have some struggles with people-oriented because their stories change depending on the audience. So these two can have some differences as well. But if you know that, then you know that it's part of them being audience-centered. They're very skilled at reading a room, the people-oriented, where they may kind of get lost in their own heads, in their own details.
I can see that content person saying to the people person, you didn't include this, she didn't include that, what sad. You didn't.
What about this? What about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's all these other things, you know, but this other guy doesn't want me to talk that long, so he's trying to cut it down, man.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah. I
So-
know, so that's happening.
So yeah, I mean, gaining an understanding, this is a process. Learning how to communicate with other people, understanding what you're more drawn to is a process. Okay, now that we understand each other's listening styles, and you've already answered my question, we're going to talk about distractions. So before I bring up any of the words, what distracts us from listening? We have a big holiday coming up here. Yes,
Too
Paul?
many things that go running through your head.
Okay, so our own thoughts, internal noise.
Other people's, because if there's like, say a family get together, you're trying to listen to somebody, and then someone else starts spouting off whatever they want to talk about, then you go listen to them too, and then everyone starts talking, you just can't quite hone in on one person, so it's kind of distracts from everything.
Okay, too much stuff going on. So it could be external noise, it could just be competing noises. Okay, that's a good point.
Your relationship with that person.
Exactly, okay, very good. The relationship with the person is a big factor on the distraction. If you don't like that person,
You're gonna be like, God, get away from me, stop talking to me.
Yeah, it depends on
that's
the
that
interaction.
semantic noise that's occurring.
It depends on the type of interaction too, because I mean, like I said, if I'm getting yelled at, or when I was getting yelled at by a family member, principal, teacher, I'm one of those people that kind of like, you see that same blank stare on my face.
And it's a blank stare for a reason. It's not gonna come in. It's like a protective measure.
Yeah, so I don't know if that, like, come off as I'm zoning you out, but I'm definitely zoning you out, but you can just keep going on and on with the point.
Okay, all right, so that's a good point. How many of you just don't like to listen to things that you don't like? Because that's a big obvious one. That's like the first one in your book. I'm just not interested.
Yeah. so
Okay, that's a tough one. So there's a lot of reasons why we struggle. Distractions is a big one. Multitasking. I used to film some clips. We may have time to bring in some things about technology. Technology has benefits and it has disadvantages. One of the big ones is that it is an added distraction. We've always had problems with multitasking. The technology is taking it up to a new level, and it's affecting a lot of things. It's affecting the workplace, it's affecting our learning process, and it is actually turning into a problem that the younger generations, the millennial generation, is going to have to deal with, because it is affecting the quality of our work in our workplaces. So that's an area that is a struggle, is that area of focus. It's very difficult for people to focus for a long amount of time in our culture now because of the constant distractions. We're not getting to deeper levels of learning. It's not genetic. We aren't getting dumber, but we're on the surface. We are kind of getting dumber. You've heard that. This is a great PBS, our Digital Nation, and it's a little bit dated, so I stopped showing it. But it does demonstrate the issues that we have to look forward to. We have to resolve.